Welcome, y'all. Today's episode is with Ryan Caldbeck. Ryan and his co-founder, Rory Eakin, founded what has become one of the most innovative investment platforms I've ever seen with their award-winning company, CircleUp. In short, they use machine learning analysis to find and fund amazing companies in the consumer packaged goods space. Companies like Top, Rebbl, Smarty Pants, and we actually share some of those same companies like Top. But being the founder of an innovative investment approach that is hitting its stride is the above-the-line version, a version that can include a series of awards like Best Institutional Investment Platform, or raising millions of dollars, or having some of the best investors in the world in their corner. But the below-the-line version is that it's been a tough ride daily of ups and downs over the last 7 years. Last year, Ryan started sharing what that experience has actually been like. Not just the themes and that it's been quote unquote hard, but actual specifics. And his open and candid writing on Twitter has been shared with some of my founder circles more than any other writing. Because, well, in a world of posturing and BS, a world he and I both know so well for how we contributed to it in many ways, or how we've just been in it for several years, he has begun to turn the tide on that with something as simple as honesty. Honesty in an entrepreneurial world that is craving it. We talk about what he's already shared, what he thinks a lot about today, where we can do better, what it's really like going through a pivot, a term people use daily here in Silicon Valley, but his is perhaps the only story I've ever been able to read that actually describes what it's like. That almost encapsulates Silicon Valley in a nutshell, a creation in many forms in a nutshell, that is packaged up in this tiny little word, pivot, or founding. And you can see that word written down and think it's just so small and move past it. But he writes about how big of an undertaking something like that 5-letter word is. And that also encapsulates who Ryan has become in actually talking about these things. And he does it with an ownership and accountability that is nothing short of contagious. It's why I think he's been a major force in evolving the conversation of what it's like to be a founder. My only regret in this conversation is that we only had an hour. I wish we had more. But in any case, enjoy this conversation with someone that is having a subtle but powerful impact on how we approach creation. This is Below the Line. Yeah, this is some Rebbl tea that we're drinking. Rebbl matcha latte. It's really good.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Coconut milk, elixir, super herb powered. And you guys are investors in.
Yeah, for disclosure, we're investors in the company, and they're doing incredibly well. We're super proud of them, their mission, but also just the team itself. Cheryl Laughlin, the CEO there, has been a friend and a partner for a long time, and she's terrific. The whole team's great.
Well, it's rare that we get to have an investor on one of the quirky drinks on the podcast. What is a little bit about Rebbl? What attracted you to them as a company?
So if you look at the kind of 200 or so most successful exits over the last 10, 15 years, they all had two things in common. One was a brand that really resonated with the consumer. So think Top today, or Kind Bar 10 years ago, or Vitamin Water 15 years ago. And the other was a product that was unique in a way that mattered to the world. Both of those things are true for Rebbl. But to be frank, probably the thing that first attracted us to the company was Cheryl, the CEO. So Cheryl and I were on the board together of a pet food company called Zooks, pet treat company, for a couple of years, 10 years ago or so. But her background is just amazing. At Cliff Bar, at Plum, and she's about as good of an operator as you can find in any industry, and in particular CPG.
Yeah.
She's killer. Yeah. So yes, the company itself, when we invested, was still very early. We're really proud to be investors. They've done phenomenally well. If she had been a part of anything, we would have backed it though.
Yeah. And it's CPG is consumer product goods.
Yes,
and I mention it because in the tech realm, we're really in most, but especially Silicon Valley, but in most realms, you don't hear CPG, but it's all the consumer product goods you're buying from, Stouffer's to a Kind bars to kind of everything that you see at your local coffee shop in the in the refrigerators.
That's right.
So all these companies that you and I share an affinity for its creation of a different ilk, from the Bay Area and the tech realm that we have one foot in as well.
It is. It's a different ilk, and I would say a thing that's disappointed me over the last 15 years or so of living in Silicon Valley is its creation that I don't think is respected in this city as much as I wish it were, to be frank. I think if you and I start another game for our iPhone, that'll get more respect than if we are able to start a food company or a personal care company or a pet food company, et cetera, that really does good in the world. And I don't mean good in the world just in the form of like its social mission or giving back to the community. I mean good in the world in terms of like stripping out fat from the Big Mac,
right.
Or giving
taking out crazy ingredients that are not. I mean, I know speaking of the drink category, there are drinks that have this stuff in it called L-tyrosine, like 5 Hour Energy. It is terrible for you.
Yeah.
It's like linked to fatalities, and it is an ingredient that's just like you see it in these drinks that people are drinking, and then you have a company that comes around and says, okay, we're actually going to live by a much more transparent kind of approach or improved approach to what's putting in our, what we're putting in our bodies.
Yeah.
Hugely noble missions.
Incredibly noble. And you think about like, let's take across the bay here is Clorox, right? Clorox's main product is Clorox bleach. Clorox bleach, if we pour it on our jeans right now, it'll stain them forever. But if either of our kids stumble across that bottle and drink it, they'll die. Mm-hmm. And the concept of either of us starting a company that would create an alternative to Clorox bleach that is organic or actually drinkable is laughable. But the concept of investing $10 billion into a company to kill the taxi industry was not laughable. And I really hope that over the next 10 or 15 years, we can begin to shift our mindset a bit around kind of what's possible in CPG and what is noble and what should be created in the world, because there's so many problems. If you look at the world, or just our country in terms of obesity and heart disease and carcinogens and personal care, so many different issues to our health that either influenced or directly caused by what we eat. I think we can do so much more in the world with CPG than what we're doing. And that innovation is not going to come from the large companies. So I get pretty inspired when I see entrepreneurs like Cheryl at Rebbl that are trying to make a difference. And I get frustrated in the city when I hear, a tech blog or a tech VC kind of like mock that journey, call it like a mom and pop company. Well, is that company ever going to have an exit or whatever? And instead focus on the photo sharing app or whatever the other tech company is. That I'm not convinced. Look, it's nothing taking away from their journey, but I am pretty confident in the journey of many of the CPG entrepreneurs in terms of their ability to have and desire to have an impact on the world. So.
Yeah. Well, and you're really good at, and anyone listening to this should follow Ryan on Twitter. Really good about talking about things that you feel like more people should be talking about. And I want to get into some of my favorite, tweet storms that you've had in Twitter threads in a sec. But before we dive into kind of the, into some of the things that you and I have chatted about right before, turning on the mics, I'd love to know what are some of the other things around CPG that you just feel like no one's talking about that more people should be talking about. And obviously, because CircleUp may want to keep its competitive advantages, totally understand for the things that you don't want to share. But I just like today on this afternoon on Tuesday, what are some things that you kind of feel like, man, we should be talking about much more?
The biggest, so, I could probably come up with a list of 20 things, to be frank, some of which are incredibly relevant to what we do at CircleUp around quantitative or systematic investing in the private markets, helping to decrease bias in the private markets using data. But to be frank, the thing that I'm most passionate about, to answer that question, is related to just mental health. I mean, before we turn on the mics, you and I talking about our respective journeys to start companies. You've done it 3 times now, which is extraordinary. It's a conversation or a topic that doesn't get as much depth as I wish it did. I think it's gotten more breadth in the past, I don't know, couple of years. From some entrepreneurs in particular talking about it. But there aren't a lot of channels like this where conversations are allowed to happen for more than 3 paragraphs in a blog or 3 minutes on a TV segment.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I think about with this entire podcast was in those journeys of 10 years of building companies and the third company, Till, being by far the most ambitious. The other 2 barely even compare, but even those without any employees, the stress and I think my the challenges were pretty much the same. It's a constant. It's not really like the pressure increases. I think anyone that is starting to create something from scratch feels they're sensitive to the pressures, even if they're 3 months in. But on the mental side, it was just when I would read a book that about a founder's life, I would love those 3 paragraphs or that byline or that one chapter. And I wish there was, and the best I would get would be the entrepreneur talking about having panic attacks 7 years in. Not that we need to, I don't want this to be like, challenge porn, because it's not something to dwell on too much, just that it exists, but one, knowing that it exists with others is was so valuable to me. Knowing that it was, what I was going through was normal, and you could be, Phil Knight in Shoe Dog talks about his journey in such excruciating detail, 7 years in, and it's still being so tough that I remember just being so thankful that he was honest with because most revisionist, hindsight looking books, they barely put, even a chapter in.
Yeah.
But then you're left thinking like, well, okay, well, how could I navigate around that? At least I was left thinking like, okay, are we just going to be okay with this, or are there ways to progress around it? And I hope through these conversations, we can illuminate these things for founders, but just having the conversations to begin with. Yeah. It's really tough to have these kinds of candid moments with founders. It's really tough. It is. But I agree. The first thing you said around just knowing that you're not alone, knowing that like someone else has been in this journey and was panicking and was 7 years in and had no idea what to do. And even if there's no kind of roadmap that comes out of that story or Shoe Dog in that case, I personally just feel so much safer, better. I feel calmer knowing other people's journey, the unvarnished journey. And it's not that I'm not like looking for someone else to fail for that reason, but I have been in my own journey. There've been so many points when it's been just beyond my wildest imagination in terms of how hard it was. And it begins to force me to think like, am I just screwing this whole thing up? Am I even remotely good at this thing? And you know what? I don't even know if my board can understand what I'm doing, because they only see me for 4 hours a quarter. And so how can they maybe I'm screwing this whole thing up the rest of the 99% of the time, but they don't see it. And so they're going to see it in a couple of years when this whole thing fails. Mm-hmm. That's run through my head before. And reading about other people, by the way, that still might be true, but reading about other people's journey, both the good and especially the hard times,
has been helpful for me to just like slow down and calm down a bit on those, not panic attacks, but just like those spirals of mental health that I've at least experienced. You mentioned Shoe Dog. I think the one that has probably been most helpful for me in that regard is Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, where there just seemed like some pretty candid stories that didn't always, to be frank, make everyone in the book look super great. You know, the quote from Mark DeBen in the book, there's one quote about like, do your effing job. Right. And that just stuck out to me so much. They're both of their courage to include that in the book, because I'm sure they both had to sign off on that.
Right. For listeners, Mark, I think, sent him an email, said, because Ben sent him something of critique. And Mark sent him an email back and says, do your fucking job.
Yeah. That moment's happened, you know. Maybe not that exact language, but like it's happened for founders. It's happened between founders and their board. It's happened. And it's a really hard moment when something like that happens. So reading about that from other people, particularly those who ended up being successful in a variety of different ways, for them to share that, I just think was generous, and I was really grateful for it.
And I think is a hallmark of why I enjoy these conversations, is because you, like me, can probably count on one hand how many candid versions you get to see. I mean, you're bringing up an email from a company that we both know exists because it was in a book of a successful founder, and it took the courage to put that in the book. That obviously happens for every company. Or the more that you do this, you realize how common these low points are, but you never see them to the point where, I literally, Shoe Dog and The Hard Thing About the Hard Things are the two books that come to mind that actually talk about, they're not trying to sell you on this fake version. They're telling you the real version. And you go from thinking, oh my God, these signs around me are signs that this is about to get much worse, to, oh, these are signs of normalcy. And it might not be, it might not turn around at 180 degrees and be perfect tomorrow, but holy shit, at least these aren't signs of impending doom. These are signs of normalcy.
And you contrast that with the culture, at least in San Francisco. There's very much like I'm crushing it culture. And, you know, you meet with another CEO, 99 times out of 100, at least my experience, that's what they want to talk about. And that has, from at least my health, such a destructive impact. It's like, not only do I miss the opportunity to hear about your journey in a vulnerable, authentic way that helps me feel less alone and more connected to you, but it went the other way. And now I'm just hearing about how you're crushing it, when, I don't know, maybe you are, but God, even if you are, aren't there some hard things? You know, I remember the best moments, and we've had a lot of hard moments, but the best moments we've had at CircleUp, I felt so alone and so scared. I was telling someone a story the other day. We had a really, really big investor invest about a year and a half ago. And I remember I was sitting in a conference room by myself when they called me and they said they were going to invest. It should have been the single best moment in CircleUp's history in 7+ years. And put down the phone, hung up, left the office, and I was happy for 7 minutes. Like, and then I began to like tear up, like literally tear up, because like the overwhelming pressure and like sadness of the reality. Wow, this comes with a lot of other pressure, like a lot of other stuff that I got to deal with. And look, maybe that's my journey. Maybe that's, I should have dealt with it better, but I remember even the best times are still really hard. Let me just say as a caveat, I'm fully cognizant that I am in an extremely privileged position. I'm living in, the Bay Area. I'm the CEO of a company, white male, got a lot of things that I'm extremely privileged to have. So there's a lot of people who have it much, much, much worse than I do, to just tell that story. But sometimes just mental health isn't necessarily connected to all those things. Sometimes you just feel sad.
Well, and you might be able to because of circumstance, swim a few miles per hour faster, but you're still crossing the Atlantic.
Yeah, that's what it feels like sometimes. Yeah.
And so it is and I don't think it's very comforting. And this is the creation of the, I'm so glad we're able to chat today. I've been looking forward to this for a while. And I thank you to the Twitter follower that mentioned that we should chat, because it was on my docket to reach out to you. And and I think there's not much, it doesn't make you feel a lot better if someone says, in fact, it would make me feel a lot worse when people would intimate that, well, you have it so good.
Yeah.
And I think for the best founders, at least for the ones with the heart in the right place, they're trying to leverage that good to create progress in the world. Mm-hmm. And so just knowing that there is good there, it's like, another metaphor is you have a lot of jet fuel. Yeah, but you're trying to get somewhere pretty dang far, and you intend to leverage it all. And so just being told, hey, but you got a lot of jet fuel.
Right.
That is almost a reminder of why you should be moving faster, or why you should be doing even better. And I think it's why when I would chat with founders, kind of the real conversations, it was never that. It was like, I've been there. Let me tell you what I did to navigate having to do X, Y, Z. And it's one part comfort that, they've been through it, and it's one part actual, like, tactical advice. But that first part is so critical.
Yeah.
And you talked about comparisons, and there's the quote, "Comparison is the thief of joy," and I think comparison to the fake is the thief of progress. So much so that's a real reason of this project, and the conversations like this is like, you compare to the fake, and then if you're a founder 7 months in, you'll quit.
Yeah.
Because you think it should be this fake version.
Yeah.
And then you hear the real version, like Brian Chesky at Airbnb will say, they launched 3 times over the course of 2.5 years before it ever felt like it started to move in the right direction.
Yeah.
And the version that we think of, like, build an app, you mentioned a photo sharing app, build an app like Instagram, and
right.
a year in, it is, you're going to have $1 billion company.
Yeah.
And that is just so far from what it's, quite literally Instagram, which I mentioned on a podcast with Eric Ries. They effed up so bad that they had to rebrand their app completely. Just, throw away bourbon, if you remember that part of the story, and start all over. And yet that part gets chopped off from the story. Well, something that I want to bring up or I want to chat through is the tweet threads.
Great.
And it is, just kind of want to get right into one of my favorite tweet threads of yours, which was about a year ago. And it said, a year ago, almost this month, in May, so a year ago this month. You started off by saying, I believe there are things that CEOs almost universally feel, but are afraid to talk about, making this journey as a CEO lonelier and less healthy. I recently had an amazing dialogue with some other CEOs about these topics, and I wanted to broaden the conversation publicly. People may make up stories about my intentions, call me weak, brave, etc. It's very interesting that you're almost acknowledging people will call you one of those things, and maybe they're both not true. But mental health is a vital topic that doesn't get enough attention, especially amongst leaders. This isn't a sign that I'm burnt out or that CircleUp is in a rough spot. Far from it. It's me sharing how I feel. What was your feeling before you wrote this and put this out there? Because this got this amazing reception. Did you think it was going to have, did you feel like it was going to tap into some latent demand to hear this, or were you scared?
So that was probably the most scared I've been on putting some content out in the world. That was the most scared I've been. Well, first of all, like, I felt pretty confident that it was going to elicit a reaction from hundreds of people. Like I didn't think it would just be silent. I thought But I thought that there was a non-trivial chance that it would get a negative reaction, particularly from folks who would say, "You're so privileged right now. What are you complaining about?" I mean, which, is fair. My best friend in the world is a nurse full time and in kind of Army Reserve as well. He's dealt with he's been in Afghanistan, right? He's dealt with real issues. And there's a lot of people in this world who have dealt with really difficult things. So I was scared about that reaction. I was not scared of silence. Silence would have been fine. I mean, it would have hurt my feelings, but it would have been okay. I ended up sharing it with 5 or 6 folks before I put it out into the world. And the response was not great from those folks, to be candid. In particular, there's a couple people that I really, really trust a lot who have been incredibly supportive of me, but also just mental health more broadly. And they, cautioned me, said, "Hey, you might get some negative blowback in this. Are you ready for that?"
What kind of negative blowback were they?
But just kind of what I was mentioning before, like you may get "you are already privileged" feedback, especially putting it out into that particular medium where there are some beautiful things about Twitter, and there's also some things around the ecosystem on Twitter that can lead to trolling, et cetera. And that was a concern. So I put it out there, but I wanted to do it because actually the way you just started it was the truth. I had started a program with some other CEOs, and the conversation was just so transformative for me. It was the best thing I've ever done professionally, that I wanted to try and replicate what was beneficial for me to the world. And what was beneficial for me was hearing about other CEOs' journeys in a vulnerable and authentic way. And so that's what I was trying to replicate.
Yeah. I don't understand that critique of you're so privileged, you can't feel.
Yeah, I get it. I really liked your analogy with the jet fuel. Anyway, it ended up, I think, it's always hard to say if something you received a positive or negative reaction, because most likely the folks that didn't like it wouldn't have ever said it to me, right? So maybe there's someone who would have reached out, or an investor that would have invested, or someone that would have done something with us or me personally that was no longer going to do it, and I'll never know that. But the reaction we did get, both privately and publicly, was largely constructive, and I was really grateful for that.
I remember reading it and being like, "This is it."
Oh, thanks.
This is kind of the beginning of breaking down a wall, because not only you sharing it, which was this kind of narrow edge of the wedge of getting in there in people's dialogue, but the way that so many people, so many founder friends, they received it with such open arms of like, I'm going to point to this until I have the courage to talk about my own experience. I'm going to point to this and just say, this is it.
Thank you. I have been really grateful to hear a lot of private stories from people who responded to that tweet storm or to other tweet storms about mental health. My reaction is often, I wish, you, meaning the other person on the other end of the conversation, I hope you share this. I hope you share your journey publicly.
Right. Jump in.
Yeah. And I think I sometimes feel guilty saying that, because I don't want to put pressure on them to do something that they don't feel comfortable with. But I also wish they could feel what I feel, which is a sense of a weight off my shoulders a little bit. I feel a little bit healthier, a little bit more comfortable talking about it. And I wish they could feel that, A. And then B, I think it's better for the ecosystem. The more people that do it, I think the better it is. And so when I get like inbound, either on Twitter or just offline, email, et cetera, I try to encourage folks to do that, and it usually doesn't work. But I'll say it again here on this podcast. I hope more folks kind of share their authentic, vulnerable journey.
Well, and I think it's and it's not just for, I don't know, online kudos. I think it is as dire and as important as it is the thief of progress for us. For us to see where we are in 2019 and say, okay, this is where we want to be collectively as a human race. This is how important I think this is. By 2029, it is going to require so much of us to participate in that creation. And if we all have these false notions of what creation is like, then we will quit after 4 months, 7 months, 17 months, 24 months, because the expectation, the experience do not match up. And it is quite gnawing for any of us to try to do anything and continually get this feedback loop every day. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. You can do that for 4 months, but you get 6, 7 months in and you feel like, okay, this is not how it's supposed to feel. It is that much easier to say, well, this isn't right. The world is telling me this isn't right. But and I just think it's that consequential versus, the quote that I say often on this podcast, which is happiness is experience minus expectation. If you can recalibrate that expectation down, then you're not in this net negative territory constantly of expectation. What you thought it was going to be like. Yeah. And even more than that, I mean, that's on the thematic side. But I think on the tactical side, you open up the chance for someone to give you that advice that you really need to hear.
Yeah.
Instead of, well, let me go back to this thread. I go to the 12th tweet, and it's, you talk about the fear and the self-doubt, and you mention all of these things, getting into specifics, which I love that this thread, it was very specific into what you were going through. It says, I feel all of these things every day, and many other CEOs do too, wherever they live, whatever type of company, organization, team they lead, fear, self-doubt, and fatigue. But it's really, really hard to say it out loud, especially in Silicon Valley, where there is, to what you just mentioned, all caps, so much posturing.
Yeah. That has been a really lonely experience for me, the posturing in this city. I was with this CEO program that I mentioned, which isn't public yet, but I'll talk about it in the next couple months at some point. But I was with this group last week, and it's a group of CEOs who are just authentic and vulnerable with each other. And I remember saying to them last week, in 15 years, I don't think I've ever felt comfortable in a room with other entrepreneurs. I've never once felt comfortable. I always feel like an outsider, or, are we doing well enough? Am I good enough? Am I this? Am I that? And it's an experience unlike I've ever had in my life. And it's not because I was like ever the best at anything. I wasn't the best student in my high school. I wasn't the best basketball player on the team. I was never the best anything. But I never felt the same type of just crushing insecurity and comparison that I do in this city on this topic. And for whatever it's worth, I don't think it's because of the stakes are higher. I don't think it's because the competition is greater. I think it's a bit about this competition of this culture of posturing. And it's like I say sometimes publicly, like it's a I'm crushing it culture. Like all the CEOs will just say like they're always crushing it. How's it going? We're crushing it. Everything's so great. Bullshit, honestly. Like, the best times I think a company can have, they will, like, if the CEO is being honest, there's still 100 things that are just killing that CEO. And it's not just how can we grow more? I was at a CEO conference 4 years ago on the East Coast, and about 50 CEOs in the room. And the topic was an amazing topic a CEO of an existing company was talking about pivot he was going through at that time. And it was as raw and candid of a conversation as you can get. And the CEO is based on the East Coast, and we talked about an hour together as a group of the 50 CEOs, and it was just amazing. One of the CEOs in the audience, who happened to be a CEO based out here in San Francisco, said, look, my main problem is just like, it's really hard for me to just keep up with the growth. And I just want to throw my book at him. Like, go to hell, man. Honestly, like, is that really the hardest thing that you have to deal with? Anything else? Like, do you have any HR issues you have to deal with? How about the competition? Because you're in an amazingly competitive space. Is there anything else you have to deal with? Or is that truly the hardest thing? By the way, the company ended up closing down. He ended up getting fired before it closed down. But that type of stuff, for me at least, just makes me feel so lonely in those conversations. And at times has also made me almost feel, I don't know if dishonest is the right word, but like, it's hard to engage in that conversation with that CEO when he or she is saying we're crushing it, and for me to say, well, actually, we've got 1,000 things that are really wrong. It's hard for me to say that, but if I don't say that, then I'm not being honest. Then my head kind of spins in a circle, and then I just don't get anything out of the conversation, which makes me feel more lonely.
Yeah,
so
that is interesting. That it almost it almost becomes contagious.
Yeah.
Where, all right, now the context is set for, what can I get out of this conversation? Well, it seems to be a losing battle to actually talk about things real.
Yeah.
So let me try to posture to gain some foothold on the same level level playing field. And I totally, I know what you mean, to where, like I wonder if you 5 years ago would have been like, dude, come on.
Yeah. Or
if you would have been like I would have been, which is like, oh, they are probably crushing it, and we're not.
I would have been the latter. Yeah. Which hurts a lot.
As an entrepreneur, I think that's one of the things that has been so helpful from my perspective as an entrepreneur is as an investor. And, Warren Buffett has a quote, I'm a better investor because I'm a businessman. I'm a better businessman because I'm an investor. And being an investor, you just see a portfolio of 30 companies. Mm-hmm. When you are just your own investment as an entrepreneur, you don't see that spectrum. Mm-hmm. It was one of the other great things about going through Y Combinator was you just see every breed of type of founder, all 20, 30 different types, all in different stages, 10 different stages, and you get to see that in a 3-month window. That was helpful, but even more helpful being an investor, because you do get a lot more of still not completely real versions, but a little bit more, and you obviously get kind of a spectrum rather than your own experience. And you guys investing in so many companies, I wonder if that's also helped that's broadened your perspective to realize and jump straight to, okay, this is bullshit.
Probably. I think I'm a better investor now than I was before starting CircleUp. I was an investor. And I think I'm a better investor today, having gone through that. I did not realize how much of that is BS before I started CircleUp. And how much of it was just a total facade. I saw you had Mike Maples on this podcast a little while ago, and I love that. I've never met him. I've heard only great things. But I think if more investors broadly in Silicon Valley can help create safe spaces to have these conversations, have just authentic, genuine conversations, I think the better. And I think the opposite has been happening the past 5 or 6 years, where many, not all, but many of the VC investors that I've interacted with almost kind of look for the Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg arrogance of, walk in, I'll show up 20 minutes late to my meeting because I was with 3 other VCs before this, and we don't need your money. We'll get it from someone else. Doesn't really matter. And I think Y Combinator, to be candid with you, kind of propagates that a little bit. Like, hey, the term sheet for the 1-month-old company is $12 million pre. You got an hour to decide.
Right.
And I do kind of wonder if that is like, if they have some kind of bizarre pattern recognition where they're looking for CEOs that are arrogant and a little bit jerks. By the way, I don't think any of them would admit it. And I'm sure when this goes live, I'm sure some VCs will totally disagree with what I'm saying, but that's certainly not been my experience. I'll give you an example. Like, I got advice early on. I like sending thank you notes. I just do. And I got advice early on from an investor that I trust a lot to not send thank you notes. And his logic was, look, the VC that you just met with uses pattern recognition. And if you have time to send them a thank you note and the inclination to do it, many of them will interpret that as you're not running to another meeting with another VC, A, and then B, you really need their money, because if you had 10 other term sheets, you wouldn't be sending the thank you note. And I hate that. But that's part of that game that I think exists.
Yeah, I remember a VC saying they thought I was too nice.
Yeah. What does that mean?
And literally said, she said, I just think he's too nice, and I don't know if he has the temperament to build a company.
Yeah.
We were like two people.
Yeah.
And I don't think I try to be kind for sure, but I'm sure I'm total a-hole at times.
Mm-hmm.
And the chaos of building something, I know of the times that I was, but that was such a strange thing to hear. Yeah. 6 years later, I still see so much, like, from the humanity side, flaw in that thinking.
Yeah.
And I'm sure she was just pattern matching.
Well, and the humanity side, but also just like the logical side, is if the dimension of quality of nice to mean is completely the same dimension as being able to give, let's say, direct feedback to a teammate, or being able to make hard decisions, right? Like, why are those the same dimension? Why can't you be able to communicate directly, or be able to fire someone, even if you are nice?
Right.
And at least if someone had told me that 7 years ago, that would have screwed with my head.
Yeah.
Quite a bit. So,
well, I hope for the founders listening, for anyone listening, to know that it is, the pendulum swings. I think how you do anything is how you do everything. And so when someone does write a thank you note, my pattern match is, or when they are kind, my pattern match is, that mofo is going to be able to recruit really well, because they take relationships really seriously.
Yep.
And that guy or girl, by having that time to invest in relationships, is going to succeed in an environment where, to your point, the pattern might not do that.
Yep.
But every great company and every great founder is anomalous.
I love that.
And I think it's, kindness too. I think of the best founders that I have ever had a chance to work with, and they are so kind.
Yeah.
It's actually, it's very, I've never seen the pattern that she saw, and she was I think she was a PM at Google before, so maybe she saw managers that were that way. But like I've heard, just great things about so many founders that I've never met, of how kind they were. Paul Graham says he's talks about the commonality of kindness and the best founders in their portfolio. I know Brian Chesky, so kind, and there's stressful moments, but you can. I have seen so many breaks from that narrative.
Yeah,
I want to encourage every founder out there that it has not been my experience.
Yep.
But it totally did mess with my head for like years.
Yeah.
I don't know if it messed with my head for years, but I still think about it now, and now I'm kind of on the other side where I kind of laugh about it. But yeah, for 2 or 3 years, I was like, am I too nice?
Yeah.
Well, if we go down on the thread, you mentioned that I feel jealous almost every time I talk to another entrepreneur. They always seem to be better than me or us at something, anything. Shows like Silicon Valley are not fun for me. My mind just spins about things we could be doing better, or reminds me of painful failures. And I don't want to beat this thread to pulp, but I completely identify with that of when that posturing happens. not only is that person, I think actually you said it, it's not even for humanity, it's logic. When you do posture, you're going to engender these jealous vibrations that you're putting out. Two, you're going to miss the chance to actually get real advice. But it is and kind of to that comparison as the thief of joy. I think one of the hardest things about being a founder is you don't get to see the actual scores. Like it's not like basketball. So you and I played basketball growing up. You actually don't know where you are.
Yeah.
And that's actually one of the worst parts because you're constantly trying to find a foothold of where are we. And in this posturing, I completely resonate with this, or this thought resonates of, it's just this, your mind truly just spins. And I want to zero in on that word choice.
Yeah. And for me, that particular tweet, like in my journey, has not been just as a result of the posturing of the other person. I feel that jealousy, and I still today, even if there was no posturing, to be candid with you. Like there's just, I really struggle with that jealousy. And I forget if I said this publicly or even in that tweet storm or not, but I've never felt jealous in my life before this. People got into better colleges out of high school. People were better basketball players. People got better jobs. People did better this, better that. Never felt jealous. I don't know why. It just wasn't something that I really felt. People are smarter. People are whatever. CircleUp, being a technology entrepreneur, I feel jealous 15 times a day for 7.5 years. Just everything. And it's not because, in fact, if the other person is saying they're crushing it, I actually feel candidly less jealous, and I just feel like, go to hell kind of thing. At least I do now. Maybe not in the beginning. The jealousy thing, that's been a really hard thing for me to wrap my head around. A CEO gave me some amazing advice about a year ago, which I think I have said publicly before, I've passed along, which was, he said, if you don't enjoy the journey, the only thing that matters is the destination. And if the only thing that matters is the destination, then it just becomes a scoreboard. If it becomes a scoreboard, you will always feel jealous. And I think that is what drives it sometimes. Sometimes, like if I'm having a really hard day, or I'm just wrapped up in all like the things that could be better, and I'm not enjoying the journey, that's when I just feel particularly crushingly jealous. Yeah.
And on this, Tuesday afternoon, have you felt it today? Have you felt it yesterday? Were there moments, today that ignited that kind of?
There probably, yeah. I mean, I'm jealous you have a podcast. I'm not joking. Like, I'm jealous of that. I wish I had a podcast. I like this a lot, and just. And not even, and I'll tell you exactly why I'm jealous about it. It's not even, I'm sure this is good for like a bunch of reasons for you professionally. I'm jealous, probably 10% for that, but 90% because like, wow, that just looks like such a great experience to be able to do that. Like, just what a wonderful thing that you can give to the world. Content that you think will help other people. I'm jealous of that. Like you're trying to make a difference in a really productive way. I'm jealous that you get to do that today. I'm jealous of, a CEO that I was interacting with today or last night, who I was helping her connect with a big investor. We're not even looking to raise money. And I felt jealous. I don't know why. James, I can't and that's one of the unhealthy things about it. It's not clearly obvious. If I was raising money, it'd be more straight line. Yes, this is why you're jealous, but like, we're not. So why would I feel jealous about that? Well, maybe that's an indication she's doing really well. And by the way, totally non-competitive business. So why are you feeling jealous? I don't know. Yeah. And I'm trying to do work with myself and a team of folks to try and like get a better handle on that.
Well, I'll tell you, I would love for you to guest host some episodes.
Oh, I'd be honored.
You can see, try on the glove, see what it feels like, and you should I think you'd be amazing at hosting a podcast.
Oh, thank you.
And it is, this is not posturing. This is one of the greatest aspects of this is that there is no real purpose. I mean, the purpose is to help with, to write this book and to gather the information to help guide this below the line part of the journey, the psychological part of being a founder. And ideally, 100 conversations from now have some insight into what the ideal psychology we should bring to each day. Because it's just, and we were chatting about this a few minutes ago, just you can look up a blog post or read in a chapter of the book on how to run a performance review, how to raise a Series A, how to do a reference call. And the literature on the logistics is so, it's so available. But the literature on, okay, how should I approach each day? That insight of, if this is meant to take you somewhere else, boom, you're in a scoreboard, boom, you're going to feel like you're losing. And it's that insight of, if you can't enjoy the journey, and it is about the destination, well, then let's walk you through where you're going to end up. You're going to feel like you're losing. And it's that insight that you don't hear the antidote to, but man, just hearing that is the actual potential is so powerful. But outside of that, take the book out of it. It's really purposeless in so much, just doing it for its own sake. And what has been really, I've wondered, like, well, why is it so enjoyable? And there really is no professional. I think there, like anything, if you can provide benefit, then there's, benefit comes back to you. But it's really not even 10%. It's literally just, I can do this. It does not need to have goals to it. It does not need to achieve it's not a symbol for something else. Like when I ran my company, it was a symbol for something else, or it was like, this growth this month means this, which means this, which means this. And it's just a shade of a shade of a shade of a shade of what I actually care about.
Right.
And this is more like just sitting down and playing the piano, or like, dancing. Yeah. There's no purpose to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think talking before we turned on the recorder about, I got some advice from my management coach around, finding activities that, don't have an end state, and it's just about the journey. And so the example would be like playing with your kids. And that has been really helpful for me. It can be something, quote, small, but it's been really helpful for my mental health to have that framework. So you're right. It's not necessarily a complete antidote or solution to the problem, but it is a framework that points me in a direction. So the first framework was, if you don't enjoy the journey, you only focus on the destination. That's what leads to jealousy. That's a framework, right? Okay, well, what do I do with that? How do I enjoy the journey? Well, find activities or things that you can do that don't have an end state, or in your language, necessarily a purpose. Could be cooking, could be playing with your kids or playing basketball, whatever it is. And that is another step forward, for me at least, has been on my mental health journey, which has been really valuable. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to say this, I feel like a number of times throughout this conversation. Thank you for everything you're sharing. One of the things that you touched on that I want to go back to is, what role do you think VCs and investors play in these narratives?
So I don't know if I want to caveat this. I was thinking about caveat in my experience. I don't even know if I want to say that. I think by and large, a pretty negative one. I have a lot of friends that are investors. We have a number of venture investors into CircleUp, the majority of which have been incredibly supportive and constructive. So there are exceptions to everything I'm about to say. But if you read, venture Twitter or you read TechCrunch, or you go to any of the demo days, or you pitch VCs, I guess it's really hard for me to imagine a CEO or founder walking through that and not experiencing a fair amount of posturing, a fair amount of arrogance, a lack of empathy on the journey, a lack of genuine empathy. Like every VC out there will say, yeah, it's a really hard journey to be a CEO. And then they'll tell you that they just flew first class across the country. Mm-hmm. Or they'll tell you about their fifth vacation in 7 weeks. And what they won't tell you about is the deal that they just lost to Sequoia, or that they're worried that they're going to get pushed out by their 3 partners, or, they're not going to, like, and that level of authenticity, in my experience, has been almost unheard of in venture. So what does that mean? Well, if you've got 2 sides of the ecosystem, kind of the money and the entrepreneurs, and the money, the VCs, are not kind of being vulnerable or authentic, well, what does that lead to? Well, if you and I are like representative of this, and you're the VC and I'm the entrepreneur, how long am I going to be vulnerable and authentic in our journey together before I stop? Because what I'm being met back with is you telling a tale about your heli skiing trip. Mm-hmm. I don't want to hear about that. Like, God, that maybe I'm doing it all wrong, because yours, it seems like everything's going up and to the right for you. Mm-hmm.
I also think it's easy for them just to see everything as destinations. I mean, I think in many ways that is those are their goal markers, are these financial destinations.
Yeah.
And therefore you are a conduit towards that destination they're trying to achieve. And for some of them, that's what you can be reduced to.
Yeah. Now look, I think to their defense a little bit, it's really hard to be let's say a general partner at a VC firm, get onto Twitter and talk about how hard your journey is. I can understand that. I can understand if there'd be a fair amount of fear. I felt the fear as a CEO that I'd get backlash from people saying, Ryan, are you kidding me? How privileged you are? Let alone a venture investor. Yeah. So I get that. But I think the lack of vulnerability and authenticity that at least I have experienced from the vast majority of investors is something that makes it more difficult for the journey of the founder. I think another thing that makes it more difficult for the journey of the founder is what we were talking about before. I think many of them celebrate activities, behavior, styles that are the exact opposite of the vulnerability that we've been talking about, right? So someone will point to Steve Jobs and say, well, he did all these things, he was a jerk in all these different ways. And he celebrated, right? Someone,
if you talk about reductionist version of a story, the dude was literally kicked out of his own company, and in the wilderness for 15 years because of who he was.
Exactly.
But I totally hear you. It's just like, no. His story starts in 2001, right, and ends in 2011. Yeah, and that's the story.
Or like if you hear stories from, I've got a couple friends that knew Mark Zuckerberg in 04, 05, 06. By all accounts, not exactly an entrepreneur that like people were excited about in terms of a personality, meaning, extremely arrogant, a bunch of other, I would say, issues. He happened to have one of the greatest product market fits in the history of the world. It's good for him. So now when we talk to other founders and they talk about publicly finding the next Zuckerberg, finding the next Steve Jobs, well, how does the entrepreneur hear that today, 2019, and not at least partially connect it to some of that behavior?
Right.
That's kind of hard for me to see. And I can give 50 other examples of entrepreneurs that by most accounts were jerks, or certainly not vulnerable, not authentic, but still were successful and then celebrated, which sends very bizarre messages when you're on this journey. I wish that there were more successful entrepreneurs who have built really meaningful companies who were able to talk in the middle of the journey about how hard it is. That's what I don't see as much,
right?
And I wish I did.
Yeah, I think it's just as you're talking, I'm thinking, pattern matching to the wrong patterns, because that's Tech investing is also this world that has so little, it operates on so little information.
Yep.
And this is what I love about CircleUp, and kind of your approach to investing is systematic, and in the consumer product, the CPG space, you can see actual sales.
Yeah.
3 months in even. And in software or a lot of technology, it's on so little information, and it really opens up for the wrong partial information being adopted, or needing to make an investment off of 45 minutes, not really understanding what made that company tick. And so you're going to take these qualities and say, this is the pattern we should follow. Or
that's right.
to.
So if you saw Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, Travis from Uber, pick 2 or 3 others, and they all were arrogant, you take a pattern recognition from those 5 examples and you say, okay, that's what I'm looking for now. And that begins to kind of cycle through the ecosystem. That would be one of my concerns.
Yeah. You could easily take those examples and miss out on the examples of Brian Chesky, or Ben Silberman, or Heidi Specter, or just, you can go down the list of people that are just even better human beings than they are founders.
Yep, exactly.
But it is easy to borrow the wrong pattern. If it is, we also just we don't know how some of these companies grow. We do not, we really have no idea what makes them tick, or it's just so easy, like we said, to take the wrong pattern.
Right.
And it's like, oh, Facebook existed because they went after college kids. Well, that's like one variable, about 19 different variables.
Right.
Facebook existed became what it has become because of the hard-nosed, extremely perseverant founder that could have been seen for early years as very arrogant. Yeah, maybe that's one of 19 different variables. Very different than something like Pinterest, or very different than something like you could point to kind of a bunch of counter examples. But everything does get reduced, and oftentimes reduced by investors that, many of which, I think you've said that if you were to start a VC firm, you'd start it with all founders. Yeah. Would love to know why you said that. I'll pause right there.
The empathy, I really liked the empathy of having gone through the journey, the ability to connect on that level. I just see to be profoundly important. At least it has been for me, to be frank. And I think that there's been some investors who are also ex-operators or ex-founders who have said that they don't feel like you need to be a founder or an operator to be a successful investor. Yes, that's absolutely true. There are some amazing investors out there. Moritz, as an example, from Sequoia, Bill Gurley, who are not founders, for sure. Having said that, if I could find investors who have also been founders, so I don't think it's required for success, but I really like what it does for the sense of empathy that can be created. Is that the only way to create empathy? Absolutely not. It's not. We have an internal investment arm at CircleUp, and no one on the team founded a company before CircleUp. We talk a lot about the journey to found a company. I share a lot from my experience. We pull in, bring in external speakers to talk about it. We try to use case studies, et cetera. And so I think that there's other ways to try and get it. But in my magical Disneyland future, I would love to have a VC firm with ex-operators that can talk about that journey and can relate to the entrepreneur on just a really visceral level.
Yeah. Well, and Chris Dixon has a great blog post on what it's like being a founder.
Yeah.
And he talks specifically of the differences. I mean, I struggle to say that there are differences on this podcast, because I think it is if you're employee 100, it is so hard. Mm-hmm. You share the burden in building something special. But I and friends of mine that aren't founders have said they would like more of that in the podcast, and I hear that. But I also just know that it is just as important for the founder to hear that, it's okay that you can carve out this especially lonely place, and that is normal.
Yeah.
For it to be, as Sean Parker once told me, he said founders or CEOs, they get way too much credit and they don't get nearly enough credit. And it's both are true.
Yeah.
Employee 100 at Facebook shared the burden of building something special. Absolutely. And employee 50 at Halo Top, it deals with something extremely stressful, hard, difficult, challenging, in sharing the burden of building something special. But it can be something else entirely if you are leading the charge at the front, and you are doubting whether you even have the right strategy at the same time that you're going as fast as you possibly can forward in commitment to that strategy. It is very hard.
Yeah.
It's very hard. And I go back and forth of how much I should acknowledge that. But I think I land in a place where, I think Sean said it best.
Yeah.
Where it is, they get way too much credit and they don't get nearly enough. One of the things that someone did write in saying that they would love more color into is when it is hard, like what does it actually look like? In one of your tweets, you mentioned a low point came at a board meeting at USV's offices. I arrived 11 months prior.
Minutes.
11 minutes. And this is actually a different tweet thread on you're going through a pivot.
Yeah.
So with a capital P, meaning this shit was about to change for the business, and you're making a drastic change. And I won't go through the whole thread, but it talks about just being years into when you should have more information, and yet all of your information is telling you, shit, we don't have enough information to tell us what we should do. We need to make a change, but we don't know what.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a pretty unimaginable position. You feel like 4 or 5 years into something, you have the information to tell you what you should do.
Yeah.
Versus like 4 or 5 years of you have 1,000 ways the light bulb won't work, but you still don't have the one way in which it will. And in that thread, you say a low point came at a board meeting at USV's offices. I arrived 11 minutes before the board meeting started. I went to use the restroom, took off my jacket, used it as a pillow, and set a 10-minute alarm. I slept with my head in front of the toilet until the bell rang.
Yeah.
Do you mind walking me through just what was going on beyond those 10 minutes?
It was the worst. That period was the worst experience of my professional life.
And this is how many years into CircleUp?
5.
This is when
four and a half to 5. Yeah.
And after Series A, B, C,
we were post C.
You've gotten through you've threaded the needle, jumped through so many hoops. Anyone on paper would say, they've made it.
Yeah. Every doubt that I felt as an entrepreneur, I think you feel doubt. Most entrepreneurs do, I think, naturally, but like, I gotta tell you, my doubt felt just like objectively right. Of course I should feel doubt. We're 5 years in. I didn't have any damn levers. How could I possibly look at anyone else other than myself on that? Like, yeah, because I'm screwing up as a CEO. And the language I was using for myself in my own head was a lot worse than that. I mean, it was soul-crushingly hard. And, I tried to summarize it in those tweets, but I could have talked for a very, very long time about the experience. I think one of the more memorable moments was that meeting at Union Square's office. Union Square is our largest investor. And it was headaches constantly because of the lack of sleep, or maybe it was the stress. My vision was literally foggy. Every 4 or 5 weeks, I'd get like a 14-hour night of sleep, and I'd wake up and it was like I put in glasses, and I don't wear glasses. Like my vision just like changed. It was a really bizarre way to explain it. Went to multiple doctors for my headaches, MRIs on my brain.
Wow.
And when there's studies that, like, if you are operating without sleep, it's almost like operating if you drive without sleep, it's almost like driving drunk.
Right. You lose, I think it's 10 to 15 points of IQ.
Yeah. And I felt incompetent. I felt I was bad at my job. Full stop. I was just bad at it. And I slept on my head kind of on a jacket, to be candid with you. It was on the floor in front of the toilet. But I didn't really think that was going to be super great to put into Twitter. And the meeting was horrible, honest with you. I remember I got in a pretty bad argument with one of the other board members. And, I'm just not operating on like a full deck of cards or whatever the expression is. I remember I had to pause the meeting, the only time in 7 years I've ever done this, and the only time in, 15 years of being on boards that I've ever done this. I said, we need to stop the meeting. And I just took 15 minutes and just like went and sat by myself in a room, because I was like so flushed with emotion and overwhelmed and everything, because like I was basically screaming at the guy in the meeting, which was my fault, not his. And
what do you think that you could control was contributing to that just the entire point in time, in terms of, it's just, I think no matter where you are in life, you can sit down quietly and see, how am I contributing to this? And I know that you're that type of leader. What do you think you were doing that could contribute to that type of scenario?
A couple things. I wasn't taking time for my own mental health, and that had a cascading effect on everyone else around me. And I remember several board members multiple times saying, Ryan, you need to take a vacation. You need to take a step back here. And
disconnect.
You need to disconnect. This isn't working. And I just felt like I can persevere. I can work harder. I can get through this. And it wasn't working smarter. And I just missed. I viewed it as like a sign of weakness to take a step back. And it would have been the healthiest thing for me and the company and everyone else around me, to do that. And I wasn't willing to do that. I view that as a weakness. I've been a big proponent of therapy my whole life, going to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and I should have gone in that period, and I didn't. I also didn't have a management coach in that period, so I wasn't getting professional help. I didn't have a group of CEOs. I wish I had found a group of CEOs to talk to.
I'm sure you had voices in your head that it felt like you were being smart.
Yeah.
What were you telling yourself at the time that limited the ability to go to therapy or to take time off?
Well,
disconnect.
Yeah, actually, I just said yes to that. I'm not sure. So there might be some revisionist history in this, to be fair, but my recollection was I just wasn't thinking clearly about anything. Like if you in this tweet storm where I talk about the pivot, if you look at the exercise that my co-founder Rory and I went through, it was a strengths and weakness exercises that like a 22-year-old in college could have done. It wasn't like particularly insightful. The concept of going to a psychologist or like, I don't want to say totally didn't occur to me, but my mind was just clouded. This was their point about you need to disconnect. You're running on no sleep for months on end. You're not making any rational decisions here. And that's what I missed. Like it just, I was driving a car without sleep, which is the equivalent of driving a car when you're drunk. And so it wasn't the rational decision of, oh, there's a signpost, I'm going to disregard that signpost. It was, I'm not even looking at that. I'm fumbling with the radio over here. I'm doing something totally like just doesn't matter. And that's just month after month during this pivot, I was wrapped up into things that didn't matter, in part because I just wasn't thinking clearly. So that's, what did I do wrong? I think that, and so what would I have done differently? I would have taken more time for myself to unplug, to take a step back, to get professional help. I've had a couple people at the company, both that still work at the company and have left the company since that pivot, who have come to me to talk about this there because they want to share their experience and they want to interact. And a couple of people that have said like, I really wish you brought us into that earlier. I wish you talked with us about that. I'll be transparent with you. I don't know. Maybe I should have. It's just a really hard thing to do. Who do you say to at the company, we're thinking about having layoffs? We might not, but we're thinking about it. Right. Thinking about completely pivoting the business, but might not, but we're thinking about it. And how do you keep them engaged and there, not looking for another job? If a founder knows how to do that, I hope they talk about it publicly, because I didn't know how to. I felt like I could count on my co-founder. And so that's why we had the conversations. Slowly, we brought in one or two other people to be a part of it. But it was really hard to have the depth of dialogue that I wish I could have had, or that maybe other people would recommend at least. I didn't know how to do it.
Well, I'd say, one of the most honest things that we can do at times is just say, I have no idea.
Yeah, I really didn't.
And even right now, I'm trying with these types of conversations, but I really don't have solid, to what we were chatting about a few minutes ago. Just, I know that 50% of it is people knowing that it's normal.
Yep.
But the other 50% is then having tips for people, and I don't have the tips for them. I just feel is calling towards just have honest dialogue, and that in itself can be beneficial.
Yeah.
I know that your tweet threads have been so beneficial as they've been shared. If you just Google Ryan's name and then his Twitter thread on from May of last year, and in mental health, and then another Twitter thread on pivot, and they'll come up. You can read them in their entirety, and I know that they've been so beneficial because specifically on the pivoting, I had never seen anyone talk about what it was really like to do a pivot. You hear these such meaningless, unhelpful carbon copies of carbon copies of carbon copies of the story of like, well, Slack was a pivot.
Yep.
I would love to know what really happened there, because someone like Stuart had already done a pivot 10 years prior. So it's like, that's like probably a masterclass in how to do it. And yet you and I, maybe the version is out there. The only version I've heard is like, oh, it was a layoff, and then boom, $5 million in the bank, and they built Slack. It's like, okay, what can I take away from that other than, okay, they did a pivot? Your thread.
And I want to know about the hour after the pivot. The hour after the pivot, when the hour after the layoff, someone at the company is saying, we were just a gaming company, and now we're going to be a messaging platform. Right. What the hell did I sign up for here?
Right.
And by the way, this isn't like, what's our mission as a company? What's the vision as a company? Aren't there a lot of other messaging platforms out there? Like, why does the world need another one of those? That's what I would love to hear about. And those are situations, to be candid with you, that like I get a little bit frustrated that we can't read about that. Yeah. Like, company's going to be fine. Company, like if he talked about the pivot today, there's not, it's not going to hurt them, and I would love to read about it, but I never have been able to.
No, and it's the carbon copy of the carbon copy of the carbon copy that is so unhelpful.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about 3 stories that have helped shape who you are, and they don't have to be work related. It really can be stories in your life that have helped shape who you are, and obviously a big part of your life is creating something special with CircleUp, so it can include that as well.
I love this. I love this story, or I love this question. So I just drove my parents to the airport this morning, and so I'm going to use 2 stories from my parents, and then one other story. First is about my mom. My mom read law. Reading law, which I don't know if it is even legal anymore, means effectively you can become a lawyer without going to law school. You just have to read a lot of books and then take the bar exam. I think Vermont was the last state to do it. I grew up in Vermont, and she did that when we were growing up. So she was taking care of 2 kids, me and my brother, and reading law at the same time. She passed her bar exam. And then she went into private practice with my dad, who was also a lawyer. And the story, it's not like one moment in time. It was just more the extreme work ethic that my mom taught us, in reading law while juggling us. When we think about, like, she had a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old at home while she's reading law. Like, I can't fathom that. to when she and my dad had their practice, she had us and her clean the office. They didn't pay for a cleaner. They didn't pay for a cleaner for our house either in Vermont. And so each Saturday we'd go to the office and we together as a family would clean. So they're lawyers. They made fine money. They ended up, upper middle class. But they just really believed in the value of a dollar and just believed in the value of hard work. And they wanted us to see for their entire careers, them clean their own office. And I just remember that so vividly, like, why can't we can't pay a cleaning person to do this? Right. And it wasn't even a chance with my mom. So one was learning how to work hard for my mom. Another story happened when I was in high school. I do not tell a lot of basketball stories publicly, but in Vermont,
can I ask why not?
I think sports analogies, I worry that just tend to alienate people. I worry that they do. I have baggage over it. So what is my baggage? I don't know. I don't want it to come across as like I'm a bro who plays sports, right? I played basketball in college and I worry that half of the people that I'm talking to won't care or will be turned off by it.
I used to think that up until maybe 6 months ago.
Yeah.
That it's like, okay, that, sports analogies can be, I remember someone telling me that it was alienating because they didn't play sports. And I thought about that years after, why that didn't sit well with me. But I respected for probably 4 or 5 years until 6 months ago. And what bothered me about it was someone trying to control my interpretation of and sharing of the world. But I also wanted to respect that viewpoint. But the reason that now I almost have gone back to it and didn't just let it go, which most of the time I do, is sports are one. It is such a well understood area of groups working together, and it is an area that I think if you grow up playing sports, you learn how to fail and get better over and over and over again. You go through losses consistently, and you learn how to work as a team. Yeah. And it's also just, you have these sports that are, they're games. They're kind of, you can't trivialize. Football is just, it's throwing around a ball, but it's a chance for you to see excellence. Yeah. And very few jobs, very few arenas can you see, to use that pun, I guess, literally, can you ever watch excellence? Yep. So you really can learn from these people that throw around a little ball on how they became excellent. So those 3 reasons, I think there's a lot we can actually learn from sports that maybe it's a tech thing, but we just like never talk about the value that you can actually bring into your own life from sports.
I like that. And maybe as I become more secure in myself over time, maybe my answer to that question will change. This is kind of where I am on my journey now. But
no, I totally hear you.
So in high school in Vermont, there's no professional teams. There's kind of one small college at University of Vermont, which at the time, hadn't made the NCAA tournament in maybe ever. I don't know. Certainly in a long time. And I played for a high school basketball team that had another rival, and we were the number 1 and 2 teams in the state. And long story short, we had a very big game. Big sellout, a lot of quote, I'm going to put publicity, as much as you can have a lot of publicity in Burlington, Vermont in the mid 90s. And I had about as atrocious of a game as you could possibly imagine. Missing layups left and right. I was the reason we lost, kind of on an objective level. You could look at the game and say, he lost that game. So the next morning, my coach, a guy named Kevin Saplicki, his son now, by the way, is the associate head coach for University of Vermont. But my coach called me into his office and he said, "Look, we're going to develop a plan for you to get better." And he wrote down on a piece of paper. It was a little 6-inch by 4-inch piece of paper that I kept for probably 15 years. And I lost in one of my moves, unfortunately. 10 different drills, just simple drills. The first one was like 10 left-hand layups, 10 right-hand layups, and then 10 jumpers from the left elbow, 10 jumpers from the right elbow, etc. And it was about as simple as a plan as you could imagine. And it was profoundly impactful for the rest of my life. I gave a talk back in Vermont about 2 or 3 years ago where I talked about this, and he was in the audience. And I teared up because of how important it was for me. It taught me to work smart, and it taught me to develop a roadmap to go after. And it sounds so simple today. I cannot overstate how meaningful that was for me, though, because up until then, I had been just like going to the gym for 2 or 3 hours, but no idea what I was doing, just like batting around in a circle. And I was working hard. I learned to work hard. I had not yet learned to work smart, and he helped me to learn how to work smart.
That's awesome.
And then the third, also about my parents, is the sacrifices they made to be home for dinner every night. And it was both special in that I think dinner is important for a family, but also representative of the types of parents they were and the sacrifices that they made. And they both got paid by the hour. It was their firm, just the two of them. So whenever they were not working, it was money out of their pocket, effectively, right? They didn't earn a salary because they charged by the hour. And every single day they were home at dinner, 5:00. And if I had a game, they were at the game. If I had a practice, they were at practice. My dad used to come rebound for me and leave at 3:00 from his job. It was all like the priority they put on family, just amazingly important for me. And, it shows up for me in a lot of different areas of my life today. Everyone at CircleUp would tell you that I leave work at 5:10 every day. There are moments, to be frank, James, that like, I wonder if I'm a worse CEO because of it, or whatever. But it's the priority that I have. There was a dinner last year with, I was at an 8-person dinner with the CEO of Coca-Cola worldwide. And I was the first one to leave the dinner. It's about as relevant of a meeting as you can get for me, for what I do.
I'll do, right.
And I don't know, my investors would be super proud that I made this decision, but like I wanted to get home to my family. And I learned that from my parents, and I'm really grateful for them instilling that the importance of family and just kind of the importance of standing true to your values, even if it meant making sacrifices like that.
Right. And surrendering an outcome to something else.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of, I want you to get home right now to your wife and your 2 kids. And it's couldn't pick a better spot to put a bow on this conversation. But I really appreciate you taking the time to share continually. I mean, this podcast is nothing compared to how much you're sharing online in real life, in conversations with other founders. And I see the reverberations with founders mentioning, passing around your thoughts, sending links to your candid thoughts to each other for comfort. And it's it is, like we said, it's 50% is just not feeling like you're alone. And we really, really appreciate you sharing those thoughts.
Well, thank you. Thanks for saying that. But also thank you for doing this podcast. Things like this are going to be steps forward for the ecosystem to help get out of that kind of posturing culture that I think has developed over the last 15 years in this city, and in the ecosystem more broadly. So thank you for doing it as well.
Well, thank you for coming on. All right, Ryan, until next time.
Thanks.
Hey, friends and listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to hear more of these types of conversations, go over to your favorite podcast app and hit subscribe, or leave us a review, good or bad. We love hearing from people that appreciate this type of conversation and want more of it. You can also follow us on Twitter at @GoBelowTheLine, as well as see in our Twitter bio our email address for you to shoot us a note on any suggestions of guests or topics that we should cover. We read every single one, so thank you for those that have already sent those in. That's it for us today. We will see you next time on Below the Line.
Below the Line is brought to you by Straight Up Podcasts.